In this lecture, we're going to discuss human evolution. We start by looking at primates in general, and we'll move on to the fossil record. We'll look at hominid characteristics, one of the earliest human ancestors, Australopithicus. Then we'll move on to the human lineage, including early species of Homo, middle species of Homo, Homo neanderthalensis, and then Cro-Magnons or Homo sapiens. So human ancestors are distinct from other ape ancestors. So all those organisms that are considered to be human ancestors are directly on our evolutionary lineage and are not shared by any other ape, any other of the great apes. And so the earliest hominid fossils, hominids being the human ancestors, are 7 million years ago. So not that long, right, geologically speaking. So we're hominids and humans are part of a group of mammals known as primates. So primates come in various sizes and shapes, and they include the apes, monkeys. Those are the higher primates. Then we have the lower primates, like the lemurs. So the early primates were one of the groups of mammals that diversified from the early mammals in the early Cenozoic. Early primates were small, about mouse-sized. They looked like shrews or insectivores about 60 million years ago. And you can see over here, this is illustration one, the early primate. So what was the climate and vegetation like in the early Cenozoic? So when we discussed this, when we talked about Cenozoic earth and life, was it warm with grasslands, warm with forests, cool with grasslands, cool with forests? Well, it was warm with forests. And so why did primates evolve to have opposable thumbs? The ability to grasp something with the thumb and the fingers. So if you grab onto a hammer, like if you hold a hammer, the ability to hold that, to wrap your fingers around it, and then your thumb in the opposite direction, that's an opposable thumb. And that's a hallmark of a primate. Primates have opposable thumbs. So why do primates evolve opposable thumbs? Because they ran through grasslands, because they lived in trees, or because they used the tools? Well, it's because they lived in trees, and there were a lot of trees in the early Cenozoic. And so being able to hold on to that tree, grasp a branch, you can see the advantage in that. So trends in early primate evolution. So they began with tree-dwelling ancestor. The limbs and hands were originally adapted for holding and swinging in trees. Over time, they increased in brain size, and they trended towards smaller, fewer, and less specialized teeth. And they increased the use of fingers, and they developed complex social lives. You see, a lot of this is because of their living in trees and what they're eating. So most of these early primates would eat the fruit of the trees. So they have a smaller range in diet, and fruit is fairly soft and tender, so you don't need as large, tough teeth. But you need fingers to manipulate that fruit to remove the hard outer casing, like a peel or a rind, to get to the fruit inside. And living in these trees, you're with this group. You're not moving around too much, and so you develop these complex social lives. And it's from these early primates that modern day primates would diversify from, and diverge from. So here we have a cladogram that includes all modern day primates. So we have the new and old world monkeys. This includes the higher primates, not the lesser primates like the lemurs. such as the higher primates. So we have the new and old world monkeys. Then we have the hominoids. Okay, so hominoids include the apes. And there are basically two main groups of apes. There's the lesser apes, and then there's the great apes. And one branch of the great apes is humans and their ancestors, known as hominids. So all hominids are humans and their ancestors. Hominoids are apes, right? And so hominids are a branch of the great apes. They branch off of the great apes. And so they are considered themselves members of the great apes. So here we go. We see even the lesser apes here. We see like the lemurs, the tarsiers. Then we have the new world monkeys. Then we have our last common ancestor with the monkeys and apes, that was about 25 million years ago. We have the old world monkeys, and then we have the apes, we have the lesser apes, the great apes, which include orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. And here is our last common ancestor with humans and modern day the other apes between 8 and 6 million years ago. Okay, we don't have its remains. We can just see from the other fossils that this is where they diverged, or approximately where they diverged, is about 8 to 6 million years ago, where the hominids diverged from the other gray apes. In particular, chimpanzees and bonobos. They're our closest relatives regarding great apes. So as I said, hominids include humans and their extinct ancestors. So they are a family within the hominoids. And within the hominoids, we also have the great apes like chimps, sometimes known as bonobos, chimpanzees, orangutans, and the gorillas. And then you have the lesser apes, which are also hominoids, the gibbons and the sapiens. So, as I mentioned, hominids include humans and their extinct ancestors. We have some pictures of some of them up here. So we learn about these hominids through the fossil record. So it's fairly poor. We have some fossils, but because the fossil record isn't extremely complete, it does lead to some controversy and debate. And so what you're actually looking at here is only fossils of the oldest known hominid. Okay, so this is the oldest known human ancestor. That's an ape, but not, but it's one of our direct ancestors, a hominid. And so you can see it's not a complete skeleton. This is this specimen was I believe it's a juvenile female, and they named it Lucy because when it was discovered on the field truck, the radio was playing "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" by the Beatles. So they have the name Lucy. So here are photographs of these fossils that were found of the specimen. So what is a characteristic of good conditions for fossilization? So quick burial, rapid erosion, volcanism, or unchanging conditions? Well, we know by now it's quick burial, right? So in what environment would you expect the best conditions for fossilizations of hominids? Convergent boundary with mountain building, so continental plate boundary, convergent plate boundary with volcanism and subduction, divergent boundary with rift valleys, so it's a continental divergent plate boundary, or divergent boundary with ocean ridges, mid-ocean ridge. Well, ask yourself, where would the most sediments be deposited that these organisms could be fossilized in, buried and fossilized in? That would be the valley, right? The rift valley. So a divergent boundary with rift valleys, continental rift. So based on the plate tectonic setting, where would you expect to find fossils of hominids? A, the Himalaya Mountains, B, the East African Rift Valley, C, Iceland, or D, Italian and Greek volcanoes? Well, we expect it was we just mentioned in the Rift Valleys, the East African Rift Valley, B. And so the earliest fossils date back to 6 to 7 million years ago, and most of them are found in East Africa in the Rift Valley. Okay, the oldest specimens are found in the East African Rift Valley as well. So you can see these right here is the Rift Valley. So what are some hominid characteristics that distinguishes them from the other apes? So one is that hominids were bipedal, means they walked on two legs, which, most of the time. It's not that apes can't walk on two legs. Other apes can walk on two legs. It's just that it's not the default mode of ground motion. So with bipedalism comes different morphological changes in the skeleton. So we have changes in the shape of the pelvis, as you can see from hominid ancestors. So these are other apes, to Australopithecus, first known hominid, to modern day apes. See a change in the hip structure. And then the skull, you can see how the skull in hominid ancestors, other apes, the opening is in the back of the skull. In early hominids, the opening is transitioning to the bottom of the skull, and in modern day humans, it's directly underneath the skull. That's to facilitate standing upright. We see changes in the spine and also in the foot in these hominids that show the progression to a more and more dependence on bipedalism. So we also see changes in the teeth, in the jaw. So this is a hominid ancestor. So this is an ape that is an ancestor of hominids. So a very large jaw, very large teeth, these big canine teeth. So that suggests we have a rough diet. A rough diet that requires some significant chewing. Australopithecus was the hominid. So he has a smaller jaw and his teeth have become even smaller. Then we have Homo sapiens, where we have even a smaller jaw and smaller teeth, especially smaller canine teeth. So the idea is with modern day humans, we manipulate our food with our hands and our tools to the point where our teeth don't have to do all the work, right? We do all of the work processing our food before we actually put it into our mouth, requiring smaller jaws and smaller teeth. Here you can see the upper upper roof of the mouth, showing the teeth of hominid ancestors, so apes that hominids descended from. Earliest hominid, our earliest ancestor, that's diverged from the other apes. And this is modern humans. So now looking at hominid evolution. So like many other mammals during the Cenozoic, the evolution of hominids was driven or in response to climate change. So we know that in the Cenozoic, the general trend was we had warming at the very beginning until we had this Eocene maximum. But then from then on out, we had a cooling trend. In the last 6 to 7 million years, where hominids emerged and evolved, we have this significant cooling trend. So our ancestors and our species evolved in the context of this cooling trend. In the Cenozoic, as it cooled, we went from the warm climate with the dense forests to the cooler, drier climate where the forests yielded to grasslands. So early on, these primates are hominid ancestors. They lived in forests, woodlands, savannas, but the population had adapted to a variety of surroundings. And their unique appearance allowed the versatility and habitats with or without trees. And so that gave them an advantage. So they could, hominids, because they were bipedal, well, the bipedalism was thought to be a result of the disappearance of trees. And so some trees, not exclusively living in trees. And so they transitioned from exclusive tree dwelling to living in mixed forests and grasslands. Because the idea is, if you're living in these forests that are surrounded by grasslands, you're feeding from low bushes, from bushes and low branches. It might be easier to stand up to reach some of that material. If you're using tools, right, you need to carry those tools with your hands. In order to carry those tools with your hands, you need to walk upright. While you're going from one patch of trees, one group of trees to another, you're walking through the grass. You need to be able to see over the grass in order to see predators or other tribes that you're in competition with, or see potential prey. And so you need to see over the grass. So bipedalism is advantageous there. And also weapon use. Weapon use for self-defense from other competing tribes, and also weapon use to capture prey. To use those weapons, you need the use of your hands, which requires bipedalism. So how are horses and hominids similar? They both adapted from forests to grasslands, both adapted from grasslands to forests. They both did not need to adapt to their environment. The correct answer is A, right? They both evolved in the Cenozoic, where the cooling and drier climate caused the forest to yield to grasslands. And so the organisms were forced to evolve to that changing climate with horses and hominids, right? But evolution drove them to different solutions. So here we see a timeline and major milestones of human evolution. The present day is on the left, where time is moving to the left. So this is 8 million years ago. So we have well, I guess we'll go through this. We have walking upright. So walking upright, mostly bipedal by 4 million years ago. Use of stone tools by about 2.5 million years ago. The control of fire, a little bit less than 1 million years ago. Larger brain size, about 500,000 years ago. And then agriculture, fairly recently, just for the present. You can see this cooling trend too. So, as you said, hominid evolution was in the last it appeared 8 to 6 million years ago. And so it was really, hominids were evolving majority during the Pliocene, and then the Pleistocene. And there was a significant cooling. We know the Pleistocene was an ice age. And so humans, you think about it, they evolved in a cooling climate. And so these are different species of hominids, and they're kind of grouped based off relations and in time. And here they are mapped using this tree to kind of illustrate those groupings. So we have the earliest species down here, Australopithicus, the robust species, and the Homos. That's our genus. So the earliest species, they're the first to take upright steps. Australopithecus was the first to walk upright regularly, but still did climb trees occasionally. And the Homos, they had large brains, they used tools, and they're the ones that left Africa. So there's no clear consensus as to the path that this evolution took, because the fossil record is incomplete. There's some missing gaps in there that have not yet been discovered. And so there's different interpretations that exist for the fossil record until more specimens are discovered to fill in those gaps. But the oldest fully upright hominids is the Australopithecus. So they had smaller canine teeth. They have long curved fingers because they're still climbing trees, and they're fully bipedal. So they're different from hominid ancestors, the other apes, because of their bipedal, their shape of their pelvis, and their smaller canine teeth. Characteristics that they retained from their non-hominid ancestors was the protruding face for that forward jutting jaw and the backward sloping forehead, the very prominent brow ridge. So this is the brow ridge right here, the very prominent brow ridge. Brain was approximately the same size as modern day apes, 390 to 550 cubic centimeters, where modern humans have a brain volume of 1,350 cubic centimeters. They're roughly the same size as chimps, and has long curved fingers, and they're good for climbing trees. And you can also see there still a lot of hair. So here's that Australopithecus we just looked at. You can see where it fits in. It didn't have, here's the forward jutting face, or we say the backward sloped face, with a very prominent brow ridge. Okay, so Australopithecus still has that forward jutting face, and they still have a prominent brow ridge. Unlike humans, which their face is more flat, and they have a very minimal brow ridge, modern day humans. So Australopithecus, they ranged widely in Africa and lived between 3.9, so 4 to 3 million years ago. And so Australopithecus, an interesting looking specimen. So we know they're fully bipedal from trace fossils. So we found these footprint evidence. And the brain size was bigger than chimps, but smaller than present day humans. So the question is, why is there a volcano drawn in the background of this picture? So this picture is an illustration of the Australopithecus that made these footprints. As in ancient times, volcanoes were more common. The rocks contain ash layers. The footprints appear to be hurrying away from something. Well, the footprints were made in a layer of ash. So the artist took the interpretation there must have been volcanic eruption in the near recent past, or occurring at the time that those footprints were being made. And so Australopithecus is the group that Lucy belongs to, as I mentioned, the oldest known fully upright hominid. And so here the white is the actual fossilized remains of Lucy that were found, and the dark are basically interpolated bones. So we already discussed the similarities and differences between Australopithecus and modern day humans. So moving into the modern day human lineage, the genus Homo. So from Australopithecus came the ancestor of more modern humans, Homos. So examples of the Homo genus include Homo habilis, that's early Homos, Homo erectus, it's middle, and Homo neanderthalensis is late. So the difference in Homo from Australopithecus, one of them is increased brain size. We have a less of a sloping face and a less prominent brow ridge and smaller teeth. And also tool making. And the tool making is specific to Homo genus as far as the hominids go. Other organisms like other apes use tools, but as far as hominids, it's the Homos. And the use of tools potentially resulted in a more diverse diet. So opening up more potential food sources. So these are basically rudimentary stone tools. So they take a rock like chert or obsidian, and they're able to nap, what's called a process called napping, where they fracture off flakes to create a serrated edge or a point. So looking at early species of Homo, we have Homo habilis, which means like handy man, or handy ape. They lived 2.5 to 1.6 million years ago. They had a larger brain, smaller teeth, and spent most of the time on ground. So they weren't spending too much time in trees, unlike the Australopithicus. And they used tools. So then we have the middle species of Homos, Homo erectus. So it differed from modern humans. It had still the smaller brain size than modern humans. Still had that prominent brow ridge and larger teeth than modern humans. They were tool makers and used fire, and they lived in caves. Picture of a interpretation of what Homo erectus may have looked like. So Homo erectus left Africa. We know because we find their fossils not only in Africa, but in Europe, Asia, and in Oceania, down in Indonesia. So they migrated from Africa during the Pleistocene and Ice Age, whenever sea levels are much lower. And they lived 1.8 to 5 million years ago to 50,000 years ago. So 50,000 years ago isn't that long ago. If you think, agriculture civilization was about 8,000, 10,000 years ago, right? So it's about 1/5 of the time that we've had civilization and agriculture. 5 times, longer ago. Here's a Peking man dig site. This is in Indonesia, where in Java man, also in Indonesia. Oh, Peking, is in China, Java man, Indonesia. And so these are all Homo erectus. And they look a little different. So they were shorter than the African Homo erectus. So you could see even variations in Homo erectus geographically, how they were adapting to the environment in different parts of the planet as they spread out. And from Homo erectus, we have Neanderthals, the Homo neanderthalis. And they inhabited Europe and Central Asia, lived in mostly cool climates, lived 200,000 years ago to 28,000 years ago. Once again, 28,000 years ago is not that long ago. So they had an increase in brain size compared to the earlier Homos, decrease in the brow ridge. They still have that backward sloping forehead, but smaller brow ridge, decreased teeth size, and a little bit less sloping face. So what is the difference between Neanderthals and present-day humans? Well, there wasn't much. They were just more physically robust. We have a larger, we have fairly similar brain sizes. Our brains were structured a little bit differently. But they still had the more heavier brow ridge than humans. That was smaller than other earlier Homos, and still had a bit of a sloping face, unlike the flat face of modern humans. And they had a slightly larger and differently shaped brain. but you can see they're on average shorter. They are much more stockier, having larger bones, so they're more muscular, just more hardier. So more massive, heavily muscled, short lower limbs, which is similar to people that live in cold climates today. And they did not walk slouched like some interpretations in the media show them. So here's a Neanderthal skull compared to a modern human skull. So you can see the skeleton looks very similar to a modern day human skeleton, just a bit stockier. So the remains of Neanderthals have been found more than 100 sites in Europe and parts of Asia. So Neanderthals evolved in Europe. So Neanderthals never lived in Africa, unlike modern humans. Modern humans evolved in Africa and then migrated out of Africa, where Neanderthals evolved from other hominids that had already exited Africa and were in Europe. So they had specialized stone tools and weapons, and they took care of their injured. We know this from fossilized evidence of healed broken bones, showing that injured individuals were nurtured back to health. And you also know that they buried their dead. They're the first known hominid to practice this. And so they obviously, why they buried their dead, we're not sure. Maybe if they had some religion, we don't know. But it could just be that out of respect for their loved ones, that they didn't want the remains to be scavenged by predators. But we just don't know exactly why. There's an illustration of a Neanderthal community. There's a picture of a wax figure of a Neanderthal child. The interesting thing is that non-African modern humans share between 1% and 4% of their genome with Neanderthals, which tells us that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred and had successful offspring, fertile offspring that could reproduce to pass down those genes. So African modern humans do not have the Neanderthal genes because, like we said, Neanderthals evolved in Europe. And so modern day lineages of African lineages of modern day humans, they didn't interbreed with Neanderthals. Another interesting thing is the Neanderthal DNA is only in the nuclear DNA of modern humans. It's not in the mitochondria DNA. Mitochondria are the organelles in our cells that help take sugars and turn them into ATP, which is the stuff that the cell uses for energy. And with mitochondria DNA, the thing is you inherit it from your mother. So it's very interesting. So one thought is that, one explanation for this is that maybe whenever male Neanderthals bred with female modern humans, they had viable offspring. And in that viable offspring that could reproduce, they would not have any Neanderthal DNA in their mitochondria DNA. Whereas maybe if male modern humans bred with female Neanderthals, they did not have fertile offspring. Their offspring were sterile, could not reproduce. That's one explanation for the lack of mitochondria DNA, of mitochondrial Neanderthal DNA in modern humans, but 1% to 4% of Neanderthal DNA in the nuclear genome of modern day humans. And even in 2005, 2015, it was found that sequencing the genomes of Neanderthals, we see a small amount of modern human DNA in Neanderthal genes. So there's definitely evidence that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred. So, we carry, or at least some of us carry a small part of these Neanderthals with us. And so they were different species of humans, but they weren't different enough that that we weren't able to interbreed with them. But they did eventually go extinct. And while they went extinct, some people thought it's because, you know, modern day humans are just more advanced with tools, and they, you know, they displaced the Neanderthals. So finally, we have the Homo sapiens. So early Homo sapiens, known as Cro-Magnons, and so they evolved in Africa about 150,000 years ago. And they spread to Europe about 40,000 years ago. But there's some evidence that there's some modern human or Cro-Magnon DNA in Neanderthals in Europe about 100,000 years ago. So it suggests that there was some humans that migrated out of Africa, some modern humans that migrated out of Africa into Europe around 100,000 years ago. But that line of modern humans went extinct. And so this then a second wave came out of Africa about 40,000 years ago that actually was able to take hold and survive to modern time. So you see the date of the fossil. So this is years ago in East Africa. We see 160, 154,000 years ago. South Africa, 115 to 90,000 years ago. Africa, 92 to 90. Australia, 60 to 46,000 years ago. Asia, mountains in Laos, 63,000 years ago. Mongolia, 40 to 20,000 years ago. China, 139, 111,000 years ago. And Europe, 36, 34,000 years ago. 35 to 30,000 years ago. So actually, Europe is one of the, according to the fossils, more recent destinations or of modern humans. But as I said, that genetic information suggests that there might have been some modern humans made in Europe earlier, but just didn't survive. So these modern humans, as you see, 150,000 years ago, that doesn't even, it's hard, you can't even plot that on this time scale. And so Homo sapiens, the wise ape, you can see the culmination of all these changes. We have instead of a backwards facing, so we have a forward facing, upward forehead. And so if you're familiar with the brain, so in the brain, in the center, you have the oldest parts of the brain. Or some people call it the lizard brain because it's the most primitive part of the brain that we inherited from, the most primitive vertebrates, right, that we've evolved from. And so it controls instinct and desires for food, for reproduction, for safety. It's basically the lowest level of thinking. And then as organisms evolved over time, new parts of the brain evolved, and one of those, the most recent, is the prefrontal cortex. Is one of the newest parts of our brains, and that's where the higher order or higher level thinking takes place. And so that's what's missing here, right? Because the skull, we have that upward forehead because the skull is making room for that prefrontal cortex that's not there. It's not very developed, at least in our ancestors. But that's where what really makes us who we are, makes us different from, biologically speaking, from our ancestors. And because of our expansion of our brain case in that direction to accommodate the larger prefrontal cortex, we don't have that prominent brow ridge. Because this prominent brow ridge is from the skull just going backwards, right? Because we have this bone around here to protect the eyes, but so we just don't have the prominent brow ridge. We have the much smaller jaw and smaller teeth. As you can see, that decrease in jaw size and teeth. So the Cro-Magnons, they replaced the Neanderthals in Europe. They went extinct 28,000 years ago. They were highly skilled nomadic hunters. And they followed herds and their seasonal migrations. You can see some hunting a mammoth or a mastodon there. They used specialized tools. So they lived in caves and rock shelters. They were cave painters. They painted hundreds of scenes in ceilings and walls and caves. Many are preserved today in these caves in France and Spain. And these Cro-Magnons are considered to be modern day humans. So human evolution from this point on became cultural and not biological. So it's assumed, accepted that at this point, humans were technologically advanced enough that they were able to manipulate their environment to the extent where natural selection didn't operate on them the same way it did other organisms, where they now could manipulate their environment in a way that it wasn't the survival of the fittest as far as traits, it's survival of the smartest. And you become smarter in your culture, right? So instead of an evolutionary race on who has, the strongest bones or, the certain teeth or vision or this or that, it's who has the best social structures, who has the best technology, who has the best, all these other cultural components. That led to success. And so human evolution from this point on became cultural and not biological. And so though art is not something that is specific to modern humans, because we know that Neanderthals also produced art, modern humans, the Cro-Magnons, are definitely the most artistic. And art is really a higher level of thinking. It's being able to represent, thoughts and ideas externally and convey information to other individuals, other members of the same species, without through a certain language or body language. Art allows not only the expression of emotion, it allows the transmission of information. So paint pictures of game and other things, just to tell stories, to basically record a history for future generations, so they know where to find what animals and when to find them there. So this is cultural evolution of art is not specific to modern day humans, but it is specific to hominids and the very recent hominids, Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. And this is something that the earth had never seen before, the evolution of art, right? And so this is art and this cultural evolution of humans is a huge evolutionary leap on this planet that had never seen before. And it's one of the most powerful evolutionary leaps the planet, it's probably the most powerful evolutionary leap the planet has ever seen, because it's no longer bounded, our species is no longer bounded by the physical limitations of our bodies as other organisms are. We are only bounded by our collective imagination and how we're able to cooperate together to solve problems, which has brought us to the point where we have the ability to, leave this world, leave the planet. That we now have seen that our ancestors, life, that we evolved from, got its start, and we through the last 3.5 billion years, the evolution has culminated in our species, and now we are able to leave this planet and explore outer space, and to become a truly interplanetary species. Hopefully in the future, if we expand to Mars, we've already touched down on the moon, but if you can expand to Mars and colonize on Mars. But with all that promise and advancement, there also comes the negative consequences that we also have the ability to have negative impacts on the planet in ways that other organisms never have. So the creation of nuclear weapons, and also our ability to change Earth's climate through burning fossil fuels. So it's not all positive. This cultural evolution that we've has not always been a positive thing. But I want to stress that it is easy to be upset with, and to be angry at humans for what we have done, right? With global warming and climate change and pollution, but especially with climate change, burning of fossil fuels is only a couple of hundreds of years old. It is extremely new, and humans didn't have the science or the understanding to know what impact burning those fossil fuels was having on the climate. And we also didn't know, as our population grew exponentially, how that impact would grow exponentially as well. Keep in mind that our understanding of the Earth itself is fairly young. Plate tectonics wasn't a viable scientific theory that came together until like the 1960s, early 1970s. And so you really can't blame humans for that. It's just humans being human, using the environment around them to their advantage. And so we shouldn't hold people of the past, like people who invented automobiles and invented technologies built around fossil fuels. We shouldn't hold them responsible, right? Because they were not able to respond because they didn't know what was going on. But we now know what's going on. We now know what's happening to our climate, what we're doing to our climate. And so the last couple decades, including now more than ever, we are the first of a couple of generations that actually know what we're doing. And so we are the ones that are responsible. So hundreds of years, thousands of years in the future, whenever our species looks back to this time, this critical junction in our species history, where we're entering into sixth mass extinction because of the climate change driven by the burning of fossil fuels. How we respond to this, we will be judged. And we will be the ones, if we do not respond, we will be the ones to blame. Not the ones that came before us. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know the impact, but we know the impact. And if we know the impact and continue the status quo, then that is on us. At the same time, they could also look back and see that we knew what was going on. We knew the impact we were having, so we did something. We changed. We pivoted to renewable energy sources so that we did not have to, we were able to live our lives the way we want to, not at the expense of the climate, not at the expense of the organisms that we not only share this planet with, but we depend upon. So I like to think that's how they'll see us, because I like to think that that's what we'll do. But it's a survival of the fittest, right? And it's a cultural evolution for humans now. So will our culture recognize the existential threat that's in front of us? Will we adapt to be fit, or will we not adapt and potentially go extinct? The one thing about cultural evolution that's different than natural evolution is Natural evolution is not purposeful. It's organisms don't choose to evolve in certain directions, change in certain directions. Cultural evolution is purposeful. We are in the driver's seat, right? So there is plenty of hope. So there's plenty of hope. We just need the will to survive. And that concludes our lecture on human evolution.